on the end, I would like to have take 12.
Okay. Welcome. Thanks everybody for staying until this final session. And I am going to focus on something that I have mentioned a little bit already, which is the interviews that we do many times per semester with students. And following Sarah Aline at the University of Calgary, I'm calling these discovery interviews. That seems like the nicest term that is circulating out there for them. So I'll focus my presentation on discovery interviews and how to contextualize them in a way that might help motivate students. Okay. So winter 2013 at McGill University. Email summons me to an office I have not been at before. There, two men are waiting. Only a few lights buzzing break the office's gloom. Others seem to have been turned off. What were the numbers? Asked one man, my instructor. I state the numbers. They are the responses I've already submitted to this week's assignment, which was to reverse engineer the settings of some pieces of software. And the instructor looks at his companion, who nods. His companion is the teaching assistant, and the teaching assistant says, those are the numbers. It seems I have correctly answered the numbers. Disturbingly correct. Earlier, I submitted responses that, because of the way the instructor made the assignment, were indistinguishable from the cheating. Suspicion resulted, and our meeting in the digits. The meeting was memorable for its theatricality and introduced me to the art of the discovery interview. Things have changed since then. The interviews are a larger part of my life, and they're much less hard-boiled. I do at least 10 each semester. In this presentation, I'll outline a transformative approach to the discovery interviews, and I designed this approach to efficiently intervene with a cohort of students to promote responsibility for submitted documents. Great. The discovery interview has many contexts. We normally think of discovery interviews as situations in which an instructor and a student meet synchronously to discuss problems that the instructor has detected about the provenance of one or more documents that the student has submitted. In environments where ghostwriting or the computational production of prose happen often, the instructor might perform many discovery interviews in short succession. Maybe they're only 20 minutes long, or maybe they're shorter than that. Discovery interviews are often quasi-legalistic with best practices that call for instructors to take procedurally significant notes and sometimes record readings. Discovery interviews are sometimes considered to be methods to detect academic integrity violations, and considering them that way makes sense, but I'm going to argue for a revised concept of what is discovered, just as like I will position discovery interviews as appeal processes through which the instructor checks their own work, modifies their own process, sometimes reduces or removes penalties for students, and when possible, seizes an opportunity to exercise persuasion in a student-centered manner. But first, let's consider some of the other places where each discovery interview to discovery gets used. So in product marketing and design, discovery interviews are ways to locate pain points or points of friction where a user uses a product. In healthcare and social work, they do something similar, but they are more community-oriented, discovering a community's needs. As a legal process, a discovery process involves depositions and evidence induction into the court's proceedings. And in academics, discovery combines a little bit of all of these things. An interviewer does indeed learn about pain points, areas of friction where a process has broken. The interviewer does indeed learn about the interactive niches that exist within a community of students, as the interviewee has an opportunity to speak into a procedural record when necessary. Right. So, while we're considering what is cheating here, this will affect how we carry out the interview and how we define when the interviewer has succeeded. So cheating is obviously an egregious violation of a norm, but what counts as cheating and what counts as legitimate are dynamics. They are socially constructed. They evolve with a community. And in studies of cheating in video games, where cheating and legitimacy evolves quite quickly, Via Consalvo over at Concordia University has found that players cheat when stuck. So players want a gratification, they seek the gratification, and they encounter a barrier that they feel they must traverse. And there is the pain point where cheating begins. In contrast, anti-cheating is, or authenticity is also actively constructed. And a famous example of the critique of authenticity and how it is constructed comes from Stuart Hall and his discussion of how what counts as being authentically part of a diasporic community changes from generation to generation and time to time. Some other similar research has analyzed musical subcultures and what counts as being authentically punk or authentically a raver or and so forth. But authenticity is a difficult thing to text or to enforce as a boundary. In fact, it might even be impossible to enforce as a rule because authenticity is an ideal. It's the sense that something arrives without a form of mediation that would dilute its essence. And so I can't precisely test students for authenticity and penalize them when they go outside of authenticity. Instead, authenticity is an objective and an ideal, a goal to strive towards. So imagine, for example, for a moment that we reverse frequent assumptions about cheating. For the purpose of procedure design, for designing a procedure that is robust, let's imagine that students who cheat start out as a majority, not outliers. And imagine with a student who communication with a student who is cheating is not a quiet conversation, but something that goes all the way through a course's WhatsApp thread and all sorts of other communication media. So one is communicating not just with one student, but with something that echoes. Imagine that the purpose of a discovery process is to determine not what ways were broken, but what actually currently apply. What are the real realities that the student is currently governed by? And as a practical matter, assume that we can't distinguish AI writing from contract cheating because ghostwriters use AI even without telling their clients. So there are certain things that I just have to be agnostic of in those interviews. So students will be in communication with each other, except where many layers of boundaries exist to momentarily make communication more difficult than non-communication. We can expect students to talk. We can expect students to hustle. However, when students are talking, we can't assume that they're talking accurately or giving each other accurate information. Instead, more like the students' community is playing a game of broken telephone. And into this world, we wade in with our interviews trying to correct the game of broken telephone, trying to promote useful information instead of misinformation. So authentic information becomes the goal here. So course, it's in a sense a course objective. We're trying to promote authenticity, trying to model authenticity. But when we're testing in an interview that tests the provenance of an assignment is actually accountability or responsibility. And accountability for a document is a multifactor thing. It's an ability of a person to respond for the document. So when I am interviewing a student and asking them questions about what their words mean and what different paragraphs have to do with each other and with the course assignment, I'm not directly testing authenticity. I am testing the student's ability here and now to respond for something that they submit. So a multifactor principle. And this follows the more general logic that fact finding requires comparison of multiple pieces of information. So time and again in studies of people who are trying to detect things like deception, we find that, or researchers find that relying on a single close of information fails. The most famous case of this is police officers trying to tell whether someone is lying or being deceptive by looking at their face or trying to tell from their manner. It doesn't work. It's similar to random guess. What does detect whether whether pieces of information line up is comparing multiple pieces of information. So I'm never sitting in an interview judging a student's manner like, oh, this student has a bad attitude, therefore they're probably lying. Many reasons exist why someone might have an annoyed attitude toward me. Instead, I need to compare multiple pieces of information, see whether they line up, and that's where new things come to play. Okay. In addition to the interview, another crucial multi-factor process is style comparison between, say, a handwritten diagnostic essay and later essays that are submitted as the student is developing their writing. And this is especially crucial for me because I need to shift the point where a student feels fear in the process of going through this discovery. And I need to shift that point away from the interview itself and shift it earlier so that the interview is able to take some of that fear away. More about that in a moment. Okay, so what then makes a successful discovery interview? So if we imagine a totally punitive process, then a totally punitive process, the discovery interview would succeed when, like a police interrogation, results in irrefutably documented evidence that the interviewee has violated a. The interviewee consequently enters a penalty process that takes privileges away from untrustworthy individuals and sends deterrent rumors rippling through the community so other people will not try that again. And this punitive situation has several problems that I think we're all familiar with. It damages rapport when it casts instructors as enforcement officers, frightens students away from the student-instructor meeting hours when we would be best able to provide student-focused guidance. And if the student has cheated, it incentivizes the student to maintain the lie that they didn't, and therefore not tell us anything more really happened. And if the student hasn't cheated, and puts the instructor in a quite embarrassing situation, a mild version which occurred to my instructor in TA when they were sitting there in a video office going, oh, actually, this person didn't cheat, and they never recalled and into this noir situation. While the more legalistic an interview process becomes, the more workload it adds to the instructor, disincentivizing the instructor from using the process more in the interview. So we need to have a process that gives students the easy to attend the interview and doesn't gradually overload us as instructors. In a way, you can think about this as the business case for the restorative, a non-punitive paradigm or a less punitive paradigm. So a successful discovery interview might instead do as follows. It might improve student rapport. It might improve class morale. It might convey useful information and counteract misinformation, both for one student and for the student's cohort, come forth, tell your friends, and so on. And it might involve minimal additional workload for the instructor and even for the student. We want to reward the student, even if in a small way, for attending the interview. And the student should ideally be more motivated to do things differently in the future. So here's a quick case study composed from a few different interviews. So an essay appears at Canvas, learning management system from student X. The essay has several problems. Have an email from the student telling me the submission portal doesn't work. A student attached a PDF to the email. Submission portal only accepts Word documents. Second, the Word document has metadata with somebody else's name. Then the writing style of the document involves many four-syllable words that severely mismatch with a handwritten diagnostic essay I have earlier. I assign a grade of 0 and get a comment in the learning management system that says, I have concerns about how this document was made. Discuss that office hours. The student arrives at the office hours and asks what happened. The student says they wrote an essay. Can you show me? And the student produces their phone, searches for the essay on phone, and struggles to find it. I tell the student, I don't think you created the final version of this essay, and I show the student the metadata. The student says they took help.
Frame. What frame?
The student describes frantically contacting friends in the middle of the night for help formatting the essay. This explains some of what happened with the PDFs. I'd ask the student whether they are able to write and save Word documents on their device. No, the student has lost their Word login. It asks the student if they know how to retrieve that Word login. Also, no. So if we get into a conversation about that on barrier. And at this point, I applied my elementary motivational interviewing skills. And this is something I'm reading about and would encourage reading about. Rather than admonishing the student, this is what you should do in the future, the more I can ask the student, okay, what will you do now? Okay, here's where your grades are now. You have 0 on this assignment, so you have about 45% in the course. So what do you need to do to pass the course? Okay, and to get a higher grade on my final assignment. Okay, what are you going to do to get that higher grade on the final assignment? And then gradually make motivational questions and more specific. Okay, and crucial to this is detecting the error, the problem, well before the interview. So the point when a student is most afraid is the point when they receive a message from me that says, I'm concerned about this assignment. Basically, you are under suspicion, you've been caught. That's when the student probably feels the most fear. And then from that point forward, once they enter the conversation, things become easier for the student to deal with. This is a piece of a larger flowchart I'm working on for this. And the limiting factors here are whether the student is willing to continue giving more useful information and whether I have more time. And so I'll keep making my prompts more specific for however much time I have and however much information the student is willing to volunteer. And then if the student stops giving useful information or I run out of time, I move to the next phase of the process. But I am also trying to budget time that by the end of the process to get the student to think beyond the penalty process. So there will be some penalty if indeed they cheated or I think they cheated. It's usually 0 on an assignment and a misconduct report that feeds into a multi-stage misconduct reporting system where the first offense is not really a big deal. So I don't feel too bad about that. But then the student needs to think, how will I pass the course so I don't lose a bunch of money for this course? And then if the student has gotten into further trouble, they still need to think, how am I going to continue to get my degree? They need to think beyond the penalty process in order for the motivation part of things to work. Okay, so in this case, the what actually happens is that I am investigating. I end up investigating pain points for a class, finding out where the cheating events cluster, where students get stuck on their way to the gratification. They'll pile together at those points. There's going to be cheating happens in certain places. And then I adjust my course design around those places. So in this case, regarding the word access issue, I added scaffolded assignments where there's a super low stakes assignment where a student just has to basically submit a valid Word document with their own metadata in the document. Student might get a 0 on the assignment. It doesn't really matter. Then they come in and talk with me, and then I can start the process of dealing with that so that later things have easier to verify. Some further resources that I can. Oh yeah, I kind of skipped a slide. Yeah, there we are. Direct you to. So Nabelli et al.'s definition of accountability in regards to artificial intelligence is quite useful. because again, it takes away that burden from us of having to test for accountability, this kind of mythical task, testing for accountability, instead allows us to test for, not accountability, to test for authenticity, kind of impossible, testing for accountability, quite possible, accountability, responsibility, we can test that. That's a pragmatic thing. And further resources, Sarah Eaton's lab is quite useful. Publishes hair almost on a monthly basis now as they try to track the progress of how the students are interacting with the eye, but also with other things like ghostwriters and paper notes and so on. Eaton has some further guidance about discovery interviews. And the sort of state of the art there about how to document and what types of questions to ask. And she even gives a list of available easy questions, easy open-ended questions to proceed with. Okay, that is what you have for the scripted part of my presentation. I am available for questions.
Question. So, regarding your example that you shared about the student who didn't have the access, presumably what might have happened in that situation is the student, kind of waited till the last minute, didn't maybe read the instructions carefully. Then when they're, I'm going to do it tonight, just do tomorrow, and then realize they had this issue, and it would be like almost too late to get help. Whereas if the student was aware they need access to their word, their word account, they might have reached out earlier and said, hey, I don't, it's just what should I do? But at the same time, you also mentioned the students talk, sharing information. There's the broken telephone, the misinformation. And I know from my own experience dealing with students, they often coach each other on what to say. So how do you tell the difference, or does it even matter whether that student was being honest that they didn't have the account and that's why, or they're just using that as an excuse to avoid the uncomfortableness of uh, admitting guilt?
I'm sure that and I've had a few students in that situation. I'm sure they've told me many things that are not true in those moments, but I know they've also shown me some things that are certainly true, like having trouble finding the documents on student having trouble finding documents on his phone, and students struggling to log into work, wanting to be able to log into work, not being able to do that. I saw that repeat among a few different students, and so I'm sure that part was true. And then I don't really care you, but you're absolutely right. Many scripts circulate on the WhatsApp group and all that. So I after interviewing few students, hearing certain consistent parts of the story, and most importantly, watching students demonstrate their processes on their devices, I feel that I was able to take away one extremely important piece of information, which is that people weren't using their login information. It's still a mystery for me how they use their login information. I don't know. I don't really know how this happens. I keep asking students this, and some say, well, we don't realize how important it is. So when I arrived at college, I didn't realize this would be something that I needed. So I received an email saying I should log in, set up my account, and I just didn't do it. But it's also possible that other things are happening. Like it's conceivable, say if I'm a student who wants to do some contract cheating, I could give my account to someone else who uses it to go to a course for me. And I have no idea if people are doing that. I only learned that Word was a barrier. And so I made some changes to the course to address the barriers. With that said, though, probably the more important takeaway for me to sort of promote for you is that these specific barriers that you find will be different. Maybe in some cases they'll be the same as word thing, but in other cases you'll bump into other pain points that students are clustering around when they're in the panic mode where um, interesting decisions happen.
So when you do make adjustments to the curriculum based on findings clusters, uh, you find that uh, improves or like reduces the amount of academic conduct later on in the course, like the more formative assessments, like you kind of are now all the potential issues, those, and then once it gets more
high stakes, they're doing what you want to do, or is it like how big are the effects? Is it just
Right.
Yes. For in my courses, what has happened is that I have shifted the word disaster and the Microsoft Word related cataclysm from happening at the first major paper to happening at a minor paper later. It still happens. Everybody still has the same panic. They just have it earlier with a low stakes assignment. That's sort of great enough for me for addressing that issue. I tell people at the start of the course that they need to have their word logging set up a certain way, but they don't believe me until they hit the barrier the first time, and then the conversation happens in earnest for people. I think also part of this is dealing with young people and the developmental psychology of the ability to think far ahead coming to us later in life. So I assume that a 19-year-old student needs some prodding from a small assignment in order to think ahead to solve that thing.
just about so the word issues are probably one minor things you run into. The main ones would be just flat out chain it like using AI and submitting that. Or are you finding uh with earlier small or low stakes assignments, detecting it then and sort of kind of explaining what's right and wrong? Does that have a positive effect on the more hard item assignments?
It certainly has a positive effect. I believe that the positive effect is quite modest, like was honest, because some people, I'm sure, just learn how to work their own Microsoft Word account and then cheat in other ways anyway. Some people will do that, and then a lot of those people may get caught later. They're at other pain points. However, I feel that still a little bit of progress is made where at least someone might be cheating out of way, but at least they know how to log into Word. Now, it's, well, perhaps more crucially, they know how to stamp their resume with their own name, which is going to be important for so that it doesn't have, their rank and trade in each of the resume template from. So a little bit of progress is made, but you're absolutely right. The process never ends. But
I've been arms race.
I think so. And maybe that's also an important sort of ethos to have about these things where we're not trying to, so the advice that a therapist gave me a while ago is to avoid getting burned out, focus on the small gradual changes that you can make. So I think this consistent with that ethos. One pain point out of this weddings. Yes, Melanie.
I'm gonna how much time thank you to have these because sometimes I see office hours, right? And there was like 20 students waiting out there, students waiting to be taught to the instructor. So how much time does it take to do these interviews?
The fastest ones that I've had were probably about 5-10 minutes. And actually, once um, I disconcerted a bunch of the folks at the Writing and Learning Center by interviewing about 7 students at the same time because they all had the same metadata problem. They didn't know how to use Word properly yet. So these were not students who were ardently trying to ruin the academic integrity of my class, but they did have some academic integrity problems. So I had the same conversation with about 7 people at the same time. And afterwards, some of the folks, in the open concept office were kind of saying to you, like, were the students intimidating you? And I had to say, no, I intentionally processed an interview with many people at the same time in a hurry. Your mileage will vary. So shit, I've got that. I think something I haven't found though. I haven't found students putting pressure on me to interview fast, especially if they're at the student instructor face-to-face hours. I've never had a student say, "We need to talk fast. I need to go now. I need to go now." I won a couple of students trying to drive their car in Zoom office hours. I had to think in front of me and say, "Can't do that for safety reasons. Come back when you're not driving." But as far as once a student is in the office hours, what I find is they're willing to talk for as long as they take to prove their point, and it's rather I who moves things along to the next phase, because sometimes people have in mind that if they just insist that they didn't cheat, therefore it will go away. If I don't look at it, well, in that case, it's like, okay, fine, I'm going to tell you what I think, and then we'll go on. We'll talk about the next thing anyway, and see if I can move a little bit to the motivational phase. Well, we conclude. Okay, thanks everybody.